Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session on GHG emission accounting and reporting for transport, organized by the International Transport Forum, and I'm looking forward to a very good session. I will be the moderator of the session today. I'm Herman Sips. I'm at Smart Freight Center as Senior Strategic Advisor, working on investments for zero emission trucking. But I think, and that could be part of a great solution. We feel the time to invest in zero emission trucking and vehicles is now, and that could be part of a great strategy. But of course, a strategy has to be funded on something. And I think the foundation of a good strategy is emission accounting. Just to introduce the topic, because if you have a strategy, you need to have an understanding what you're up against, why are you doing this, what are you responsible for, how are you going to set targets. I think none of that can be done if you don't know what your emissions are and if you can't sort of account and report on them properly. So I think that is basically the background of the whole discussion we'll be having. Why would you need sort of to account for your emissions? How do you do it? How do you make sure that the data and the reporting is solid? I think it's partly the bread and butter of Smart Freight Center. We've developed the GLEC framework that was the basis for the ISO standard. So to us, that's very well understood, but we're going to dive into that more deeply, and we'll have a great panel. But before we turn to the panel, I'll hand over to Jari Kaupila at the International Transport Forum to introduce the report and give some opening remarks. Jari?
Thank you very much, Herman. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jari Kaupila. I'm head of the Secretary General's office at the International Transport Forum. Very pleased to be here today, and I'd like to start first by thanking the Women in Business Coalition for providing this opportunity to be here in Baku at the Great Pavilion to give a presentation on the work that we've done with our corporate partnership board members at the ITF, and actually very pleased also that two of the panelists come from our corporate partnership board, so having them here discussing this very, very important topic. I would like to start by just giving a very short introduction to the topic through a report that we just launched yesterday on greenhouse gas emission accounting and reporting for transport. This is, as I mentioned, done together with our corporate partners as well, and our governments and experts, and also with the Smart Freight Center with the very good collaboration. To set the scene, sort of what are the overviews of this work. The objectives of the report was really to have a look at the current state of greenhouse gas accounting and reporting across the transport sector, focus on the transport sector. Also looking at the challenges and barriers that we still face on accounting and also reporting of the emissions for transport, and perhaps map how can we overcome some of these challenges. And then, of course, highlight the best practices. And I'm actually looking forward to listening to the panel discussion about what are the best practices across the industry and the harmonization efforts that are already taking place for greenhouse gas accounting and reporting for transport. What we looked at was three different elements. We look at the accounting itself, the standards, the methods for calculations, and here we find, of course, that there are numerous methods available, and there is a harmonization ongoing, so there's a positive development that going on. We look at the data collection, looking at where the data needs are, the accuracy, the transparency of information, which is absolutely crucial, and then the reporting side on the question. So these methods contain reporting guidance, but do not necessarily provide a platform for actual reporting. So these are typically separately available. But all of that is, of course, the reducing emissions from and reaching climate target. That is the goal. And calculating reporting emission is really a key element in achieving this goal. So what are the challenges and opportunities? The data, sourcing high quality primary data is one of the main challenges that we identified in the report. There's a need for clear data quality standards and perhaps accreditation processes as well. The future tools, that's one of the things that there are tools and regulation standards that are being put in place, but we need to ensure that they align with existing standards like the ISO 14083 and the greenhouse gas protocols. The reporting requirements must, in our view in the report, emphasize both the total greenhouse gas emissions and the emission intensity values to give a much more complete picture of emissions from transport operations. And finally, we do need to continue demanding transparency in reporting standards about the data quality, the assumptions that are behind this data, and possible omissions, so that we can really ensure accountability and credibility of the data. And so finally, a few recommendations. We call for further alignment of the different standards and methods towards the ISO 14083. I'm very much glad to hear from the panel how they see these. Deepen further collaboration between existing initiatives so that we can be efficient and effective in accounting and reporting, and continue building a common framework for validation processes for emission factors, particularly in that, and adopting data quality and sharing standards that will support then transparent accounting. And training and awareness. I think this is one of the issues where we need to work further, so that there is a broader awareness across all the stakeholders, that we can have a much more higher uptake of that. So here's the report link. Please have a look. It's available online, launched just yesterday. And with that, I will turn back to our moderator.
Thanks, Jari, for that great introduction. I think it sets the scene very well, and it highlights a number of the issues that we'll sort of dive into. And maybe I was very short in the opening, but I think just to be clear as well, right? Jari also said it. This is about reducing emissions, and then of course you have to understand what they are, because of course, and we'll hear that hopefully from our business representatives in the panel, you know, if you sort of set science-based targets, or if you want to take responsibility for your scope 3 emissions, then obviously you need to understand, you know, what they are and how they sort of, demonstrate themselves across the value chain. I think that's notably a very specific challenge maybe for transportation, because obviously emissions are, you know, along the value chain. So how do you make sure that you account for that in a proper way? So I'm going to introduce the panel. So I'm going to ask Veronique Andreas from Alstom to come up, and then Irene Geleit from BP. And I'm looking to see if we have the representative from the European Commission. Simon, are you there online?
Yes, I'm there.
Good morning. It's very early in Brussels, I guess, so thanks for joining us so early. So wonderful. And I did hear from my colleague at Smart Freight Center that unfortunately he fell ill and really was feeling very, very bad. So I don't think there is anyone from Smart Freight Center joining. And Jari will sort of join the panel as well. Jari, please. So we'll have 4 panelists. And maybe I'd like to start with a very simple sort of question, and maybe an obvious one. Is maybe to, first of all, I'd like to ask everyone in the panel to introduce themselves, and maybe also in the introduction say, why are you actually engaged in the issue of emission accounting, and what does it mean to you? Because it may seem as a very boring, sorry, Simon, you know, it may seem as a very boring sort of obligatory sort of thing. So, but why would you care about emission accounting? And it may seem obvious, but I'd like to sort of hear that as well and understand that a little bit better. So can I start with you?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me in the panel. So I am Veronique Andreas. I am Vice President for Sustainability and CSR at Alstom. And why accounting carbon emission is important for us, simply because it's part of our business model. I mean, we are an actor of sustainable mobility that brings added values for communities and societies worldwide, and accounting carbon emission, accounting carbon emission reduction is a must for us. So very important.
Thanks, Veronique. And then I'll pass on to Irene.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much to Jari and the ITF for this invitation to speak here today.
My name's Irene Galit. I lead on carbon markets, climate policy for BP. So I'm very pleased to be here from a fuel producer, fuel supplier perspective. Greenhouse gas accounting is critical. You know, it's the mechanism which enables us to set our commitments and then progress our commitments and show progress as we transition our business from an oil and gas company into an integrated energy company for the future. So it really creates that foundation for us setting and meeting our targets. And we have ambitious targets on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, all the way through to our Scope 3 emissions, so looking at the full value chain.
Thanks, Irene. Then I turn over to Simon, if I pronounce your name well. Sorry if I don't, but...
It's obviously, it's the same. It's Polish pronunciation, Szymon, but Simon is perfectly okay. So my name is Szymon Ścisłowski. I'm representing the European Commission department, which is in charge of mobility and transport, and I'm a deputy head of unit for maritime transport logistics unit. Why carbon accounting or greenhouse gas emission accounting? Actually, we conduct continuous dialogue with the industry for many years already, and in the dialogue with the industry, we were trying to identify some measures, some actions which can be initiated on the Commission side, or maybe to say better at the EU side, to support the businesses in their operations. So one of those measures which were identified in our discussion with the businesses was indeed to create a common framework for emissions accounting, to have a kind of harmonized system or environment on how to calculate emissions from transport. And that led us to a new Commission initiative which is called Count Emissions EU, and this is exactly about harmonized framework of accounting emissions of transport services. I can tell a bit more later when I have a chance to speak and to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks. And then maybe last, Simon, Jari. Sorry.
Thank you, Herman. I think my introduction presentation already gave some of the idea, but as an international organization working for 69 member governments, but we see the landscape of the standards and for greenhouse gas reporting being quite broadly used, developed in different parts of the world. I think it's in our all interest to look at the harmonization of these standards, aligning them, and also working through with our corporate partners. We see this landscape, and I think this collaboration and stakeholder engagement across the private sector, public sector is crucial here as well in order to advance this agenda.
Thanks, Jari. That provides maybe a very nice sort of introduction maybe to the second sort of question I would have. I mean, if we understand the why, and we'll dwell on that, I think, as we move along, but certainly there are some challenges as well, maybe in sort of in the reporting, in the standardization, in the data collection. So I was wondering, if we can sort of if you can sort of reflect on that. What do you see as the main challenge you've been sort of facing? And maybe not only what has been the main challenge, but maybe also where would you what would help you to overcome that challenge? So I think if I could see some reflections, and maybe Irene, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. Yes. Well, there are some challenges. Firstly, in the amount of regulation and voluntary guidance which is coming through, it can be quite confusing. So thank you for the report that the ITF has done in bringing that together to support the private sector in navigating that. There are quite a few areas. So regulations so far have focused on well-to-wheel emissions or tailpipe emissions, and there is currently a gap for a methodology which looks at cradle to grave and looks at the full carbon footprint of a fuel. So certification there would be welcome. Furthermore, the really critical thing for deploying low carbon fuels over and above what's required in regulation is the recognition of market-based measures. So energy attribute certificates. Really, that's what you need in order to reflect how investment is directed to these renewable and low carbon feedstocks. And the accounting standards currently I would say they're vague, so they're open to interpretation, and the Smart Freight Centre has done some good work in creating an accounting framework which enables book and claim. So it enables that certificate which shows the origin and the carbon intensity of the fuel to be disaggregated from the physical fuel. And when you can recognise those, it really incentivises more investment into these fuels, as it allows the user and the producer to recognise this in their accounting. So that's really critical and one big challenge for us. Another on the corporate disclosures is the lack of harmonisation. We're starting to see a lot more corporate disclosures come through, corporate disclosure frameworks, both on the voluntary side and increasingly on a regulatory side. Not necessarily a bad thing, it's a good thing to have these things come through, but it does raise the issue of harmonisation. And, one is for ease of reporting, but much more importantly, it's around creating comparability and useful information for us in our decision making, but also our stakeholders and our shareholders.
Thanks, Irene. It brings out a number of issues. I think we'll come back to the issue of harmonization sort of later, and I should hold back maybe as moderator to say an awful lot about my organization, but I think indeed sort of with our experience as well with the book and claim sort of system, we strongly feel that if you do the accounting well and if you have a method in place that allows you, once you advance to implement solutions, that of course you also want to have the credits, whether those credits are monetary or in the public eye or the recognition by banks or by the regulators. I think that also really matters. So in that sense, I think we strongly feel, and that's not because I have to promote Smart Freight Centre, but we strongly feel that work around standardization and emission accounting and a decent book and claim sort of system is very important, I think, for all of us, because it does give solutions and the way you account for that, a credible basis. And without that, obviously, you don't know what you're doing. So sorry for that short intro once again. So Veronique, would you sort of like to respond as well?
Yeah, sure. First, the structuring of reporting structure is a sine qua non condition to enhance transparency and usability of carbon account. We see an increase in the different framework and reporting standard regulation, and this has a huge impact on the workload and it means cost. So clearly, this is a challenge for us. And as we are a worldwide company, we have to look at the different standardization everywhere, the regulation everywhere, and sometimes there is a gap between the different mechanisms for the accounting and the reporting. So that's first point. Then we believe that we have a positive point that the policy makers, the regulation makers are looking at this harmonization. So we want to take the opportunity to say it is a challenge, but we believe that we can achieve this harmonization goal. Then coming back to the objective, we need clearly to look at the big picture to fulfill the objective of decarbonizing our activities. So big picture is enough for us for that goal. We don't need to look everything very deeply, and this is a key message. And I would like also to tell that sometimes some reporting requirements are clearly not understandable regarding the objective of decarbonization. And last point is about going beyond the current scope of reporting. I mean, it's also very important to look at the avoided emissions, and I believe it is a challenge. Avoided emissions accounting is very important, and especially for the transport sector. I mean, we as a railway company are contributing to decrease the carbon footprint of the sector, And it's important to put this avoided emission in relation to our own carbon footprint. And I can tell that if we look at this, the avoided emission is much more than the emissions we are generating. So harmonization is also very important for what we call the scope 4 avoided emission.
Thanks, Veronique. Then maybe I turn to Simon, because as one of the regulators, it seems, the ball is in your corner now, right? A strong call for harmonization. So maybe keen to hear your reflections on that.
Yes, indeed. It's always interesting to hear the industry voice because actually this is something which we would like to address. And as I mentioned before, we have a new Commission proposal for CAMD emissions EU, so this common framework for calculating emissions of transport services, which we believe will soon become EU regulation. So now the file is in the hands of the co-legislators for the EU, so meaning the European Parliament and the Council, and we hope next year this Commission proposal will become a EU law. Obviously, when drafting the proposal, when preparing the proposal, we went quite deeply into the root causes and the problems and challenges for emissions accounting. We had numerous meetings with the stakeholders. We had proper stakeholder consultations, so we have a kind of proper picture what's the problem on the market. And indeed, I would like to mention two let's say problem drivers which are key to understand why we need the common framework. So the first one was already mentioned by my panel mates. So this is the fragmentation. There are numerous standards, methods, requirements which are let's say available and to which the companies should somehow let's say they need to take them into consideration. And obviously there is another issue, the problem of data. It's also the problem of quality of data fragmentation, and the type of data which should be taken into account for emissions calculation. When we speak about, I would say, method, we need to be objective, to apply a method to calculate emissions which is fair and which is reliable and which would enable to provide accurate data. And obviously different sectors of the different segments of the transport sectors, they may have different interests, to calculate emissions based on a method which may be more beneficial for this segment. So this is something which should be really taken into account. And for our proposal, we have chosen a method which was delivered by the new ISO standard 140A3, because this is actually the only standard specifically addressing the calculation of emissions of transport services. This is the first reason. The second reason is that it's based on very thorough scientific approach. It's based on the previous developments in terms of carbon accounting, and it's also international, because the transport is an international business, and we believe that this is a kind of beginning of wider harmonization.
Thanks very much, Simon. I hand over to Jari also to reflect on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, Simon, you mentioned exactly the kind of things that I also wanted from the International Transport Forum perspective, looking at what the challenges and opportunities still are. I think it's the fact that the transparency of what already exists and communicating that work that has already been done. I give a good example is that India and China are currently building and developing practices for accounting, and I think they should be using the international standards rather than building another bottom-up approach here, which leads to another framework. And I think that the Count Emission EU, which again, as you mentioned, built on the ISO 14083, can be the basis of that they should be building on these standards rather than building their own. And so I guess it's a lack of awareness of what exists that we hope to address partly with this report, but partly also with this event, and also the information that we're sharing throughout the years going forward, and helping that we can also increase this collaboration between governments and private sector on this topic.
Oh, thanks, Jari. And I think a sort of common sort of element is, of course, applying maybe at least one harmonized standard, indeed, sort of across the globe, whether that's China, India, Europe, US. I think that would already greatly help. And indeed, probably the ISO standard is the good basis for that. It seems that you're saying. But maybe then, if you have that system in place, right? I was wondering, and it's going to be very techy in a way, but so if you have a sort of a system in place, do we have enough data, and do we have enough reliable data and suitable data, to feed into that system to enable the reporting? And I was just wondering, if there are any challenges or any reflections on that, because it seems to be, I think Jari referred to that in his presentation as well. Maybe do we have sufficient understanding of the different data types, and do we gather them well enough and convincingly enough? So maybe again some reflections, and I'm going to start with Veronique. Veronique?
Yeah, thank you. Well, data quality is a very complex topic. It's all about tackling a complex problem first. So it's a complex topic to get good data to address complex problem. We lack from skills and resources to prepare and access to this data. So clearly, to prepare good data, it's necessary to have skills, and we all know that the skills are not so present in all regions of the globe. Just to illustrate, looking at emission factor that is relevant to prepare an accounting is something that is really difficult. So what we would like to push, and we are contributing to that obviously, is to that the official bodies prepare or support the preparation of data. So we have a good example in France with ADEME that is developing a lot of emission factor on which we can, as industrial, rely on. And again, very important, it's not our job, our skills to prepare such data, or at least not all the data. So the recommendation and what is needed is something that will describe the way we prepare the good data and to prepare them. And for this, we need skills and fundings as well.
Thanks, Veronique. Irene, you like to?
Yeah, I'd like to echo Veronique's point. It is a particularly challenging space, in particular for the fuels and transport sector, as we start to see more and more new feedstocks and new sources of fuel. So it is a challenge, and not only for us as corporates which need to gather that data, but also for the certification standards and also digital tools. How do we learn to manage these large sums of data as we receive them? So I think it's a challenge both for transport but across the climate and accounting space as we start to get to grips with it. And the standards have a very important role in identifying what data we need and how we pass that data.
Thanks very much, Irene. Simon, would you like to reflect on this?
Obviously, I would like to respond to both Veronique and Irene. It's indeed data quality is a key issue, and obviously, when we speak about data, our understanding is that the primary data should be, let's say, the basis for emissions calculations. Primary data meaning the data stemming from the actual operations. However, we need to produce also default values, first of all, to reflect the so-called emission factors, greenhouse gas emission factors, which are related to the emissions which are stemming from the production, distribution and use of the fuels, or energy carriers, better to say, but also the intensity values which reflect, the emissions from transport services or transport operations. So the mass of greenhouse gas emissions per ton kilometers or per passenger kilometer. So obviously this issue of data is quite complex. And to be honest, when we started our preparation of our proposal for Count Emissions EU, we focused initially on the method, but then we quickly realized that the data aspect is equally important to get proper results. Because what we have to achieve is really to have data which can be accurate, reliable, and can be comparable. So in order to have comparable data, we need to have, let's say, in order to have comparable emission calculation results, we need to have proper input data. And then in the context of Count Emissions EU, we propose to create dedicated databases. So EU databases for the greenhouse gas emission factors, reflecting exactly the emissions stemming from the production, distribution, and use of fuels or energy carriers, and the second database of greenhouse gas intensity values. So these databases will be available to the stakeholders in the EU. And I would like to mention also an important project which the Union is currently supporting, is called CLEVER. It's a research project which is supposed to address the gaps and provide input to our databases. And this CLEVER project, I understand, Smart Freight Center is one of the partners in this project. So we are very much happy that this project is running.
Thanks, Simon. I think my shorthand is basically maybe from the three interventions before I turn over to Jari. It seems to be like you need good data because, good quality into the system means good quality out of the system, right? And if you don't have that sort of match, then of course the system still doesn't provide what it needs to provide. Maybe Jari, some reflections from you?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Veronique, I think there's like a call from both of you actually on who should be working on what, and where's the comparative advantage of building this data, getting this data done. Whose role should it be? And I think there's a good opportunity here for us as an international organization. Simon from European Commission side, from Smart Freight Center, us to look at also us to work together to think more thoroughly. What data should we be producing, and what data can we be producing that is helpful for the private sector to be able to then use this? And I do think that there's some initiatives like the Simon mentioned, but also the UNEC has developed a platform. It's the Transport Data Commons that we've also worked with, and others are involved in that. So there are this work going on. Again, it's about communicating what we have. But I think one of the challenges will be, two challenges I see here as well, is the global aspect of it. Transport is a global business, and a lot of these emission factors, they depend on the local circumstances. So while we are building a lot in Europe, what about China, India, Brazil, other regions in the world? What are we doing there? And the other question, maybe for all of us, is the small and medium-sized enterprises. As you mentioned, Veronique, this is very complex question, the data. And so how much resources they have available to actually dwell into these questions. Just a question basically for all of us.
Thanks, Jari. Maybe two things to build on that. And again, maybe reflecting on some of the work we've done. We work in China and India and East Africa as well, and we do sense a lot of interest, even when we work in Kenya. So that we just recently finished a workshop on the GLAC, the emission accounting sort of and reporting sort of system, and actually and again, this is not a commercial break. I should be cautious as moderator, but we do provide a training at Smart Freight Center, how to apply sort of emission accounting and how to actually go about it and understand what you need to do and why you would even do it. And at the same time, and I think that's maybe something I'd like to mention anyway, we also we are sort of training the verifiers, right? Because if you have an emission report, of course the report needs to be verified in a way. So can we make sure that also the verifiers understand, once they put a sign of approval on this, that is done decently as well. So and again, this is not to promote Smart Freight Center, but just to to make the full chain of custody in a way sort of complete, just to bring that out in that respect. And I think, as Jari mentioned, the small and medium term enterprises, I was just wanted to turn to that, right? Because I think maybe with all the challenges for BP and Alstom, it's already a challenge, I guess, sort of emission accounting. But then you wonder, what does that mean for small and medium term enterprises? Sometimes I see a tendency, I come from the Netherlands, then maybe to say, well, let's forget about that, let's not bother them, or it's too complicated and, it's just a burden. And therefore there is a push at least maybe to exclude them from this system, which I think would be a pity, because we know in very many ways that across the value chain, of course, small and medium term enterprises do have a crucial role in the transport chain. So how do we go about that? Any reflections from the panel? Irene?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it comes back to kind of your point of good data in, good data out, and we work with all of our partners in our supply chain. We work through fuel distributors and others, and we have some best practice that we share. And we work with them, but I mean, frankly, it is a challenge. It's a challenge for us with our significant capabilities, and it's going to be more challenging for them. So I'm glad to hear that the work that the Smart Freight Center is doing it in helping to educate and build that capability. And again, it feeds back into us and our targets. So I mean, I'm sure there is more that we could do with our small and medium enterprises, our suppliers, and the folks we work with. We do work closely with our NOJV partners, so our partners in our non-operated assets, not small and medium enterprises, but again, it's an example of how we work across our supply chain to share best practice on data collection and greenhouse gas accounting, in order that our Sandow partners can set commitments and meet commitments on greenhouse gases.
Thank you. Well, of course, I agree with what you just said. I maybe also would like to point out again that the objective is to go towards net zero, and for going towards net zero, we need to decarbonize the whole value chain. So means as well the supply chain in which we find a lot of SMEs. And I can tell, just having starting to deploy our procurement carbon tool, that we are currently facing some difficulties with that. And clearly, the maturity level of the suppliers globally, and it is even true for the SME, is very low. So what we need to do? We need to support them. We need to train them. We need to find a way to fund them. Clearly, if we intend to have something that is consistent for the scope 3 on the supply chain, we clearly need to work all together to make them skilled and to allow a good, I would say, a good enough effort to report on the carbon emissions. And just one word, the carbon tool we have developed and we are deploying is addressing obviously the emissions declaration, but also the emission reduction, meaning that we are asking also the supplier to report and work with us on their reduction plan. And it's a path for the transition plan for us.
Thanks to bring that out, Veronique. Also the issue of procurement, because I do feel that could be a very pivotal sort of point where, if you include it, in the procurement, then obviously that is very important and sends a signal. And then of course, if those who sort of want to sort of work with you and live up to that standard and that pays off, that could be a very sort of catalytic, mutual benefit sort of thing. So indeed, sort of procurement is probably a very, very crucial issue. So in sort of, and to prolong the discussion, I'll hand over to Jari and then Simon.
No, thank you. I think it's very interesting to hear the industry perspective on this one, because of course as think tank we sort of look into this question from a very, very different perspective. I think there's a role for all of us to play again here, looking at what Smart Trade Center does in training, and that is one of the ways where we can attract the small and medium-sized enterprises to this. But I think, Veronique, you said that very well. The objective is to reduce emissions. And so we should not only focus on accounting and standards and data, but we should look at other ways. How can we do it? So here, while very much promoting the greenhouse gas accountings, but that is probably not the only way of moving forward for reducing the emissions in the whole supply chain as well. But I don't know, I'd be interested to hear actually from European Commission perspective as well, that sort of, when you're working on these standards, where's the small and medium-sized enterprises in that?
Yes, this is the important, very important question. Just to illustrate the scale of the problem, I think more than 90% of transport operators in the EU are small, medium enterprises, and around half of them are micro enterprises, so less than 9 people. So we need really to reflect how they can be involved, because given their limited capacity, we know these companies, and I have also, in my family I have people dealing with transport business, so I know their main problem is to run their businesses and to the daily operations, and there is really something to reflect how to put this kind of additional tasks on them and to provide proper data. This is important. So obviously, I mean, my panel mates from the industry, they already indicated something which I like: the collaboration in the supply chain. So to avoid the situation where the big companies having dominant market position impose certain requirements and press their supply chains, scope 3 partners, to deliver certain type of information. The collaboration partnership is a very good approach, I would say. From our perspective, we understand that by providing the common framework to calculate emissions, like Count Emissions EU, first of all, gives them the regulatory predictability. So this is important. Secondly, we will deliver the databases, to use the data for calculations. And thirdly, we are also planning to deliver specific guidelines for the industry. But there is also a big role for the communication, proper communication and information, because this is something to be also bear in mind, that emissions accounting should not be the objective per se. We cannot impose the emissions accounting because we want to have, that the company report their data. This should be considered as the tool for the companies to make decisions. And also this is a tool for the customers, the transport customers, to make their transport decisions on the transport options. So at the end of the day, it's not only, the ultimate objective is not only the reduction of emissions, but also improving the efficiency of transport operations, including cost efficiency. And there are good examples, when we talk to managers of green freight programs in the EU and elsewhere, actually this cost reduction aspect was raised very strongly by them, because this is really the tool to see where are the inefficiencies, in the daily operations. So this kind of tool which would allow better transparency what's happening in the organization, and to take proper actions. So this is something to be properly communicated to the transport community, including small medium enterprises. I think this is a very good message to be passed.
Thanks, Simon. I very much like that point of communication, I think, because indeed, there is obviously a regulatory sort of obligation, to account, but I would very much hope that the system we put in place also helps, companies and others basically in their internal sort of procedures, in their external communication, in their relation across the value chain, in relation maybe to financiers as well, and basically, so that it's more an enabler than just yet another sort of regulatory sort of, obligation that is important, of course, as well. I don't want to be dismissive of that, but I think if you do it well, it will have wider benefits, hopefully, in doing so. Maybe sort of looking at the time as well, because we've got 10 minutes left, and I'd sort of like to maybe bring this to a close, maybe with a sort of final sort of question, which is, you already have been engaged in this for a long time. Maybe what is it you've learned from that, and if you could have one wish, to move ahead, what would that wish be? And it could be that you say, well, my wish would be something internal, or my wish would be that some of the other stakeholders, or some of the regulators, or some of the banks, or some of the verifiers would do something differently than they currently do. So if you can sort of reflect on what you have learned as you sort of moved along, and what you would like to see as we move ahead, that would be maybe a nice conclusion of the panel. And I sort of maybe start with Veronique.
Yeah. Well, so regarding on our journey to learn on accounting, reporting, using the data for decision making, and using the data to follow our reduction, I would start to say first that we starting for a while to account our scope 3 emission, so the one coming from the use of our sold product, so the train in operation. And I can tell that it is the main contributor of our carbon footprint. The methodology was developed in 2017, and this was based on the GHG protocol. And I can tell that we were so happy to have this standard to develop our methodology, very clear, and I would say kind of easy to apply. And we also decided since the beginning to have it audited by our official auditor. Then we go through the reduction plan, so going through SBTi approach, and we have had the validation for the in 2021 and 2023 when we updated the target, and was as well very useful for us. And now we are facing and obviously, I can tell we have a very ambitious target for 2030, but I will not enumerate. It's not the purpose today. But what I would like to say is that now we are facing the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that is not really aligned with the rules that was set up by the GHG protocol. And for us, it is clearly an issue because we have differences, we have double work, and we see a threat to what we are doing and what we have put in our transition plan. So a wish is make this alignment a reality.
Thanks, Veronique. Aureen?
Yeah, thank you. So what I would say is that the greenhouse gas accounting framework has taught us really to examine our hotspots, and we've done a lot of deep work to examine where our emissions are in our operations and our value chain, and it helped us put a plan in place and enact that plan. So BP, again, we've got some very ambitious targets for 2030. And we are well on track to meet our Scope 1 and 2 emissions targets. We're 41% down emissions that are relative to our 1990 baseline, so we're kind of way on track to meet our 2030 targets for Scope 1 and 2. That being said, we face the same challenges. So, for our sector, we have some complex financial arrangements in terms of joint ventures and how we operate. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, we also report on our operated boundary and our equity share. And as new regulations come in place with a different boundary, we're then required to report on 3 different boundaries, which give wildly different data sets. That's not to say that one is any better than the other, but when it comes to decision useful information, which I'm glad we've all talked about today, because that's what it's all about, it's important to have the comparability between the standards. And that's my one wish, alignment and harmonization to create that decision useful information for comparability purposes.
Thanks very much. Simon, June?
Yes, I think I would like to concur with my predecessors. My wish would be to have a fully harmonized system for emission calculation and reporting. Maybe better to say harmonized system, because fully harmonized system is not possible, I think, given that there are different needs and purposes for emission calculation, and also the scope of the calculation, boundaries of the calculations might be different. So we may different needs for corporate reporting. We may different needs for the reporting based on individual transport operations and so on. So unfortunately, there is a kind of still fragmentation at the EU level. When we speak about the EU regulation, I agree with the colleagues. We are trying to overcome this fragmentation, and we need to harmonize what is possible. So, for instance, if we speak about the emission factors, indeed, this is something which we need to look into. The emission factors, just to have the kind of common understanding and common framework, to have this input data. Also, the method should be really, method to calculate emissions should be aligned to the extent possible. To avoid exactly the double work for the businesses, for the transport sector, and this is something which I would like to achieve in the future.
Thanks very much, Simon. Dziękuję bardzo. Maybe I sort of like to pick up a few points, and then I sort of hand over to Jari for the closure of this event. I've heard a few things, and that's in probably a very bad summary of everything that has been discussed, but nevertheless, I'll give it a try. I think, first of all, the need for a common framework came out, right? Sort of the need for more harmonization across the emission accounting and reporting. And I think that the challenge put on the table, I think, in the last minute was basically make sure that it also harmonizes, or at least is a little bit more in sync with other reporting requirements, beyond the GHG accounting. And I think that's probably a challenge that may sort of need a separate discussion how to do that in a clever way. I think obviously having a common framework also requires that you have the good input to that, the quality in, quality out sort of thing. So we do need to take a closer look at at all the data sort of challenges that we face. If you have a system, of course, you need to be able to operate it. So training is going to be very important. I think that was touched upon. And I think as well, to do all that, better understanding of, and I think was referred to, I think, in very many ways, communicating why you would sort of use a system like this, right? Not only probably, although that is very important for your regulatory compliance, but also to keep communicating all the other benefits is probably going to be a very important point as well. And I think we've heard various examples of how it works within Alstom and within BP, and I think thanks for bringing that out. So that would be my sort of very short sort of summary, also in view of the time. I would like to thank the panel, and then I hand over to Jari for final closure.
Thank you very much, Herman, and I really thank also on behalf of International Transport Forum, I really thank the panel, all of you, for your insights. Just a couple of takeaways from my side as well. The one big takeaway for ITF has been that industry is very much involved. And I think that has been a very, very important element of all the advancement that has been done on the greenhouse gas accounting as well, in the consultation with the EU, with the work with the Smart Trade Center, with all the different parts of it. The industry role is quite crucial here, and I think that is a good example of the collaboration between public and private sector as well that needs to be continuing. I do hope that this session continues that effort moving forward. And I was just reflecting on of course, the point of regulation here. What I hear here as well is that there's a need for regulation, but before that we need alignment and harmonization. So there's a fine line, I think, between increased regulation and not regulation that may just become burdensome for the industry, for the consumers as well. So the alignment, harmonization, training, and understanding why we are doing all this is, I think, important. And that's my closing point, is that the name of the session is Bridging the Gaps, Advancing Greenhouse Gas Emission Calculations Reporting for a Decarbonized Transport Sector. And I think that the last part of the point is the decarbonized transport sector. And that's the objective, what we're trying to achieve here. And I think the reporting and calculating emissions is one tool in the toolbox for all of us on that achievement. So I really thank you all for being here today, also on behalf of International Transport Forum. And again, like to thank also We Mean Business Coalition for providing this opportunity here in Baku. And for Herman, thank you for moderating our session. Thank you very much. Thank you.